Susan Smith had her first parole hearing in 30 years. Now, spoiler alert, she ain't going home. Okay, we're going to talk about it in today's video. Hello, Sofa Squad, and welcome back to the sofa. Sofa's back there. I'm right here. There's dogs everywhere. We've got a Bo, we've got a Luke. They're scurrying around. You'll probably hear the little feet pitter-pattering. My name is Paul if you're new to the channel. If you're not new to the channel, my name is still Paul. I haven't changed it lately. Now today we're going to be talking about the Susan Smith case, the Susan Smith parole hearing. If you follow me on all my platforms, you'll know that we did the live chat. We restreamed it last night or whatever, so that's on the podcast channel's description down below. Has a link if you want to watch it. So just to get everybody up to date, if you're unfamiliar, Susan Smith was convicted 30 years ago of taking the life of her two boys. She put them in the back seat of her car, strapped into their car seats, and let them drown in a lake. She went on for 9 days, saying that a random black man carjacked her, took the boys, took the car. The nation, the world was aghast when they found out that it was her that did it. And these boys had been at the bottom of a lake, and she watched them drown and was okay with that and was okay to just go about her day. So she was convicted. She was given life. She ended up getting the chance for parole. And that was recently. It was 30 years. Now, like I said, spoiler alerts here, you know, she isn't going home, thank God, right? And she's going to have a chance to go back up for parole in 2 years. So what I want to do is, number one, go over some of the highlights of like the testimony and people speaking and things of that nature. And then specifically watch the clips of her speaking at the parole. This is like the first time we've heard from her in forever, okay? Now, again, quick disclaimer. If you're new here, I want you to know, but if you're not new here, you'll be like, here he goes, that little spill. And the little spill is, I ain't a doctor, I ain't a lawyer, I ain't a cop, I'm not a therapist. I ain't none of that fancy credential stuff, okay? Only credentials we got here is the sofa, sass, and some doggies running around too, right? Those are the only credentials up in here. So just understand that these are non-professional opinions. I'm making commentary and opinions on very public information. So I urge you to do your own research, come to your own conclusions, your own opinions, and whatnot. And that's it. So let's go ahead and jump in. And what I want to jump into first is just some of those highlights of the things that really stuck out to me and the things that we heard at the parole hearing. Okay, so first of all, one of the big things is we heard at the end of it in the press conference, one of the press conferences, 470 letters came in. 6 of those were of support. So do the math on that about how many people took the time, and God bless you for doing it, to write in to say, do not let this woman ever see the light of day, okay? Now, what I want to also do is talk about the victims, okay? Not just the boys, but the victims, the family members of David. This is the father of the children. This is Susan's former husband, and including himself. Now, several of the family members did wear pictures of the boys. It was very heartbreaking. Now, also, just so you know, I'm referring to my notes on the computer here, so that's why I'm going to kind of be looking back and forth. Now, let's talk about David first. He would say that it would be like the boys' lives each being worth 15 years of Susan's time if she were paroled at 30 years. And that really hit home. That was such a powerful way to put that. Now, obviously, the boys would be 30 years old, their own lives, families, that kind of stuff, right? But to put that into perspective in that way, I was like, oh my God, just absolutely not enough time at all. Now, also another very powerful bit of, I call it a testimony, but it's not testimony. It's just people, you know, telling their stories, what's been going on the last 30 years. But David's uncle would speak, and he would mention how, like, when during all the stuff that was taking place, like with the funeral and whatnot, that David wanted to see the boys, and they were like, he can't. They were in the water for 9 days kind of thing. It gives me goosebumps. And just the heartbreak of that, right? And that man would get up there and, I mean, holding it together as best as he could for the parole board. But it was absolutely tear-jerking to just hear him speak and talk about just the guttural punch that this was, right? Now, also, the boys, the brothers, sister, they would speak, and she would talk about having to, well, she basically lives her life for them. Now, also, their aunt spoke, and she was another bit of powerful, they all were powerful testimony, right? It wasn't that one was more so than the other, but she spoke about, you know, basically having PTSD and still visiting their graves, and, you know, she recounted an experience about learning to scuba dive and how it triggered her, and the everyday things and basic hobbies, there's always this haunting trigger trigger of that event, those boys, and what Susan did to them. Now, there were a couple of supporters of Susan. It was a pastor and a lady, and the pastor apparently spoke at the trial, and he was blubbering and crying and going on about how Susan's changed, and so did the lady, and the parole board woman was like, look, we can't talk about the trial. We can't do that. So what else do you want to say? And then he immediately went back to the trial. They just let him talk. And I think in the live chat, I was like, she's probably like, we already know what we're going to say. Just let the man go. Right? I mean, during him talking, and I told the live chat this, and I'll talk about it here and now too. You gotta say this about Susan. She's really good at manipulating people. I mean, I was like, she's got a pastor up here crying for her. She is very good at manipulation. Very good. And we're gonna see some of it come through in what she says to the parole board when we get to that. Now, Susan's lawyer would speak, and basically he was like, it's a terrible crime. We're not going to talk about that much. But essentially he would come down to, this was a mental health, untreated, undiagnosed issue with Susan. And that's why these events took place. Nobody's really wanted to hear that. Now, the original prosecutors would get up there and talk also, and one of them would talk about how Susan, put those boys and her wedding dress and wedding album in that car. Like she was trying to just erase her entire life. Another one of the state attorneys talked about how when she was up in the news, and we'll see her in a minute in these clips, wearing the sweatshirt of the very man she was having an affair with, who she took the boys' lives over, right? And so it's just, it was very powerful, very impactful, the amount of turnout of family and citizens and people involved in the case that came out to speak against her ever stepping foot outside that prison. Now, the lady of the hour, Miss Susan, right? Let's get to her, okay? Now, what I've done is this. We're going to watch some clips specifically from the hearing, the whatever you want to call it, the parole board thing. And I have extracted the ones that I want to talk about. These are all just related to Susan, okay? There's probably about 13 clips or whatever. We're also going to be revisiting a few clips from the interviews that she did back then on TV under the guise of, a random black man stole my baby and my cars, right? So one thing I've done with this is I've extracted, and you'll see like some jump cuts in it. What I've done is like when there's long periods of silence or when somebody else on the Zoom is coming in, I've gotten those out, so we're just hearing like Susan's responses. So just know that. And there's only a couple of little clips like that. But let's go ahead and get into the first one.
Miss Smith,
yes, ma'am.
What would you like to tell us today?
First of all, I want to say how very sorry I am.
It's okay, Susan. Just talk with us.
What I did was horrible. And
one thing that struck me when we watched this yesterday, and again hearing it, is how much she sounds exactly the same. And I know you're like, well, Paul, it's the same person. But to me, she sounds identical to way back when. And in fact, let's go back in time for a moment and look at one of those clips.
I want to say to my babies that your mama loves you so much.
I mean, exactly. The crying, the affect, everything, right? It's really, really bad.
And I would give anything if I could go back and change it. And I love Michael and Alice with all my heart.
Influence of drugs or alcohol the night that you murdered your children?
No, ma'am, I was not.
Your attorney talked about working with mental health. Is that helpful to you?
Ma'am,
Mr. Thomas
I didn't hear you.
Mr. Thomas talked about the fact that you were working with mental health, and my question is that helpful to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that something that you would be willing to continue with on the outside if you were granted parole?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, remember how I talked about her attorney earlier and how he was like, this is like a mental health thing, this, that, and the other, and you heard right here, you know, she's been doing that. She wasn't on drugs the night of the crime or whatever. Let's go back in time and again and just look at this whole mental health thing.
Whoever has them, I pray every day that you're taking care of them.
Interesting. So, a mental health thing that caused her to snap this. Now, she'll come up with it in a minute. You'll hear her say why she lied, okay? This is not someone, again, I have so many thoughts, y'all. I'm sorry. The poster person for mental health insanity taking the lives of children for me is Andrea Yates, okay? If you recall back to that case, we're not going to deep dive in whatever, but just remember, she did the deed, immediately calls her husband and cops. I think she called the cops for whatever. She called everybody right away. This is what I've done, boom. Documented evidence of, if you know the case, you know the case, okay? But there's tons of evidence and documented stuff of there is issues going on with her. She doesn't need to have the kids. There's bing, 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 red flags, right? This right here, talking about random black man stole my kids. I hope you're taking care of them. Wearing the man she did this over's sweatshirt. No, honey. I mean, that's it definitely mental illness of some sort, but not what she's trying to claim, right? Not in the least little bit. And at one of the last clips in closing when we watch her, just keep this stuff in mind as we're watching it. You're going to see a little glimpse of the real Susan come back out, okay? You'll see it come back out there. Now, she's so confident with the lie, right? The parole board's going to mention how her crime affected the community and affected like resources, things of this nature. Not just obviously the two boys that were lost, but like the absolute ripple effect that this had on the community and the nation.
Ms. Smith, your crime took a lot of resources from the law enforcement community. What, if anything, would you say to the folks who worked so hard to find your children if you had the opportunity to speak to them today?
That I'm sorry that I put them through that. I really, really am. And I'm especially sorry to the drivers that I had to find them. I wish I could take that back. I really do.
Now, one of the original attorneys that spoke, he talked about that day. You're looking for the boys, looking for the boys. Oh, yeah, they got the tow truck. They're pulling the car up. It gives me goosebumps. And they're pulling up, and he's like, you're praying that it's a different car, that it's not that. But, of course, we know now at this point it wasn't that. Remember, those boys have been in there for 9 days. Okay. So, for her to get up here and in this terms, I wish I could take it back. I wish I could do this. I mean, these people have been traumatized their whole life, right? That's imagery you don't get out of your mind. You know, it doesn't matter if it's your kids or not, right? Like you'll never get that image out of your mind. You know, I would be curious to know, and I would want to know this, and I think I already know the answer. Y'all probably do too. Has she tried to find those people and reach out to them? I mean, she might not legally be allowed to, but she certainly didn't have a problem talking to a documentary person. Publicly doing something, going out of her way to be like, my God, I'm sorry that when you go down at nighttime, you have that image in your brain because of me. And I can't take that back, but my God, you know, that's hard. You don't see any of that with this, right? The family's like, we've never even heard from her. Right? We never even got so much as an FU from her. Okay, like, here we are 30 years later, you want to talk about I'm sorry? It's not going to cut it.
I didn't lie to get away with it. I really didn't. I was just scared. I didn't know how I could tell the people that loved them that they would never see them again. I didn't know how I could tell David he couldn't see his sons again. And I'm sorry. I don't know. I know that's not enough. I know it's not, but I don't know. I know they just sound like words, but they come from my heart. They really do.
Words from the heart. I only lied because I didn't know, how to break the news. Okay, let's listen to what those sounded like 30 years ago.
He was carjacked by a black man.
All he ever told me was shut up or I'll kill you. He said don't say anything else.
So, That right there was, I don't know how to break the news to them, so we're going to do this right here. Now, if you've been following my recent coverage on this, we covered the mayor of Union spoke out about how she victimized the black community there in Union, right? Because remember, they're going around waking people up out of their beds, accusing this person, accusing that person, because of course she made it generic enough sounding to where it could be really any black guy, okay? And trust me, that was by design, right? That was completely by design. I've said this and I will stand by it. If the police had come to her at one point with any shred of, like, say some random man had been there fishing, right? Something, right? Anything enough to put some handcuffs on somebody and bring them in a lineup and say, Susan, was it him? That man would have already lost his life to the gas chamber, whatever they do in South Carolina, I don't know. And she would probably have no qualms sleeping every night peacefully, knowing that. Right? So that's what you're dealing with here. So this isn't just, and I'm not trying to negate, like, this isn't just the boys. That's the most important thing, right? Obviously, she did something horrible. But her crime spread in so many ways and violated so many different people that it's not just, I'm sorry I took the boy's life. It's like, girl, you victimized, like, an entire community, okay? Now, the parole board will then make their way to that old pesky prison inmate behavior report. See what they had to say about that.
Do you have any issues with drugs or alcohol at this point?
I don't. No, ma'am, I don't.
And you had a recent disciplinary infraction just a few months ago. So why should this board think that if we grant you parole that you're going to go out and follow the rules and the laws of society if you do not follow the rules within the institution?
Now, here's the thing. We were watching this, and, like, before they even got to this part, I was sitting here thinking, I was like, you know what? If Susan, like, pretend they were going to let her out, and I'm like, do I think she would intentionally go out and do the same thing over again? No. Do I think if push came to shove, she would be capable of the big M again? Yes. More than that, before you got to that, what I would see her doing is just doing dumb crimes, right? It's, I don't know how to explain it, but just like something stupid, like, because she would have infamy. Obviously, it would be like Casey Anthony, this, so like, I got into a bar fight. I'm not saying that she's going to go to the bar or whatever, but like that kind of stuff, right? Of that just not being able to adjust to the public. So it's interesting once these things came out, what Susan had to say, and now let's keep going.
This last infraction, I was trusted the wrong person. This lady contacted me and I trusted her. I thought she was going to do a documentary on mental health, and I really am not guilty of what they charged me with, and I have filed an appeal on that charge. And as far as your question,
Okay, now pause there. So what she's talking about is she got caught and charged with basically, like, you know, going to take some money from a documentary person, right? Well, you can't be doing that and, like, making money off your crime. So she got charged with it and convicted, okay? So, right, 10 days before this or something like that, right? Or like a month ago or whatever. I mean, it was very recent. So within that whole confine of the prison complex, whatever, you know, they have their own little court system, if you will, for the things that she's talking about. So the second that Susan said, you know, I'm not guilty of that, I've got, you know, a thing out on that, I trusted the wrong person, it was like, this is not the thing people want to hear. Even if in Susan's world that's the truth, you know, there's a couple of things. I thought this was going to be on mental health. It's like, why are you even... You know, and part of it's like, okay, well, maybe you got to do what you got to do. You got to get money in your books. You need that, like, whatever. Okay. And then it turns out, oh, no, it's actually about this. Like, again, it's very slippery. And it's like, you know, you're coming up for parole. Why would you even be doing that, right? And it's like, oh, she's got this slippery little excuse. It's not going to cut it, right? And the whole thing of, I'm not guilty of that, because you might as well be up there and saying, well, I'm not guilty of killing the babies because it was mental health, which is what she did, right? Okay. I mean, she didn't say those words exactly, but it's like this kind of stuff. It's like less is more. Anything like this of denying guilt, something like that, like, yeah, you know what? I was dumb. I was going to do this. And there's nothing that she could say that was going to get her out of it. But just the barometer of the answers she's giving are so far off the mark. That's where it's like, oh, yeah, this board was probably like, girl, you need to go back in the oven and cook for a little bit longer. You ain't done.
I've never been in trouble before, and the things that I have been found guilty of in here have been just stupidity. I've just made, I know I've made a lot of mistakes in here, and I have learned from them.
Never been in trouble before. Pretty interesting. Now she'll talk about growing up, maturing, learning from the lessons, whatnot. Again, you heard her say these were just dumb, stupid. Remember what I said earlier? I see her doing dumb stuff on the outside. Like, that's what I'm talking about. Maybe she did finally grow up. Maybe she did learn to some degree. You know, if you separate everything she did, I think she's definitely, clearly, right, a troubled individual, okay? So, essentially, she's grown up in prison. I mean, she has, not essentially, she's grown up in prison. So, I understand all that's going on. Now, also, we would have heard from people who are like, she's done A, B, and C while behind bars. Great, fine, dandy that you found a place to do these things. That's probably the best place for you to stay and do them, right? Because if she's having this kind of trouble adjusting to prison life, which, I mean, anybody would, but it's like, what are you going to do when you get out? And your sugar daddy kicks you to the curb because he finds out you're talking to 5 other ones. You know what I'm saying? Like, what about that? One of them had stepkids. She was like, I think I'd be a good mom or something. A what? Huh? No, that's... What?
To grow up and do the right thing. I just made a lot of dumb choices and mistakes in here.
But in all those things and growing up and doing this and making right decisions now and all this, she never, according to the family, she's never, like I said, even written to say F you, right? Never I'm sorry, never I'm this. So to me, when I'm listening to someone talk, because I think that everybody is capable of, you know, change, redemption, things of this nature, what that looks like is obviously different, right? And I'm not saying like someone like Susan, who's done the thing that she did, it's like, oh, well, she's, you know, she says she's changed, let her out. I mean, there's some crimes that it's like, girl, that you don't come back from that, right? It's so heinous, it's so over the top. Like, I don't even think there should be parole, honestly, for this, okay? And I mean, there was some stuff that went on with that. I mean, there technically shouldn't have been. However, it is what it is. But regardless, it's like, I have no doubt that someone like her, you could look at and be like, you know what, she did this horrible thing and she doesn't need to go out, but she's definitely changed A, B, and C, right? The actions don't match her words is what I'm getting at, okay? She's not, there's no evidence of her doing things that would have been imperative. Now, again, there could be this level of you're not allowed to reach out to the victims, but I would almost think there could be some kind of advocate, or I don't know what you would call it, like a person at the prison, that if someone like Susan went to him and said, I want to know how I can do blank. What can I do to relay to these people this message? You know, not trying to be shady, but I want the divers to know this. I want David to know this. I want Uncle David, whatever, all these people to know this. That's where I'm going with that.
What do you think is the most important thing that you have learned while you have been incarcerated?
That people are important, that forgiveness and love, that family is important, and that decisions we make don't just affect us, they affect the people that we love.
The forgiveness thing is wild. And honestly, we're starting to get into some of these last clips where, to me, you're seeing Susan do her thing. I think it was very specific and very intentional that she used the word. She chose to say forgiveness. She's pivoting. This is the manipulation I'm talking about. And again, I'm not no therapist, right? This is just my little sofa, you know, sidebar thoughts. I think it's very intentional that she said that. It's pivoting the thing of like, you know, almost like gaslighting them is what I'm getting at. So let's hear from Susan in the past, though, about how decisions affected those that we love. Let's just hear how that played out for her before.
They were screaming, hollering, crying.
Yeah, okay. Yep, I tend to remember that was the outcome of those decisions on that night for the boys. Now, that part right there in that interview is probably the only truth that was told. They probably were screaming and crying, right? Well, at least once they figured out what was going on, because, well, I didn't want to go down that path. I've talked about it before, about what I think they probably went through in the car, but, you know, it is what it is. So let's just go on to her final words, and then we will talk about it. So let's listen to her final words, and then we'll get into, we're watching the real Susan come through here, so just look at it through that lens.
I would just like to say that I am a Christian, and God is a big part of my life, and I know He has forgiven me. And it is by His grace and mercy that, and I have a lot of faith, and I live by that every day. And I just ask that you show that same kind of mercy as well.
Okay. Let me just say this about this. What I'm getting ready to say is not a blanket statement about Christians or anything like that, right? At all. When she's asked, what else do you have to say? This is what I was expecting her to say. To speak directly. I just want to say to multiple people, but this is one thing I would love to have her say. David, I know you probably don't want to speak to me. I know you probably don't even want to look at me. And I get that. I wouldn't want to either, right? But as the man who brought these children into the world with me, I just want to tell you what I've done is unforgivable. And I get that. I'm sorry I destroyed your life. I'm sorry I destroyed their life. I'm sorry for the last 30 years. You know, that doesn't make anything right, but know that I think of you and the pain I've caused you daily. Something along these lines, right? But what does she do instead? The first words out of her mouth, I am a Christian. Then she proceeds to go, and this is my opinion what she's doing. And this is how Susan works. Remember, she's very good at manipulating, right? Now, the board does, please. The board's heard all this before, right? The board sees 300 times a day, probably however it works, if it's a monthly thing, about people who found God and all this kind of stuff, right? That doesn't work to get out anymore, okay? Used to way back when. Not anymore, okay? So, I'm a Christian. And, you know, I've been forgiven by the Almighty or whatever. And if that's the person's belief, that's great. But it's almost like she's trying to take that power away and be like, y'all don't have power over me, which I get, I get. Maybe she answers to, like, I answer to this over here. That's fine, Susan. This isn't the time or place to say that, though, because it comes off as holier than thou. And she's talking about, I've been forgiven. And so I ask that you align yourself with God and Jesus to forgive me. And if you don't, then you are not aligning yourself with that. That is, to me, what was said in between the lines of that. That right there told you everything you needed to know. There was absolutely, of the bazillion things that you could have said in your final words, it was to gaslight the parole board with religious holier than thou-ness. She could have said 1,000 things about the boys. She could have said 1,000 things to David. She could have said 1,000 things to the aunt, the uncle. Thank you, Pastor, for being... You see where I'm going with this? Tons of stuff. So on that note, on seeing the mask come down to the real Susan, let's rewind and look at a quick little montage of more of those clips from the past of the real Susan.
They were screaming, hollering, crying. What I'm going through. I mean, my heart is just, it just aches so bad. We love them. We miss them. Whoever has my children, that they please bring them home.
Okay, so that's the real Susan, okay? The parole board, like I said in the beginning, they saw through this. Absolutely hard pass. Absolutely hard pass. Not gonna happen. Be gone, right? And I said this in live chat, I'll say it again. It's a crime in and of itself that the family had to even go through this again. God bless them. David, I mean, it's like a blackout to him, right? I mean, how can you imagine? It gives me a goosebump. This is one thing that I'm not a parent. I mean, I'm a doggy parent, right? But I do not have biological children or anything like that. And so for me, I try and put myself in the position of the people, the crimes that we cover, or news things, missing child, this or that. And I try and think, what would it be like for that school hour to roll by, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock, kid doesn't show up, and the slow realization of, well, they're not here, and that sinking terror, and then a fast forward to like 10 o'clock at night where it's like, they're not coming home. Are they outside? Are they who has them? I can't comprehend that level of terror, that level of dread, that level of anxiety, right? And the nightmares that would follow. So in a situation like this, going to David where those things are coming up, oh my God, all he knows is a random black man carjacked the car and took the kids, which keep in mind, the cops smelled through this story, right? Her story didn't line up right away. They knew, okay? The cop was her godfather, who got the confession out of her eventually, okay? So they knew this. Like, this crime here was like, huh? Like, that doesn't happen. Like, the car just disappeared with the 2 babies. Okay, this doesn't happen. It's giving Diane downs, right? For David to be going through that and then to be, oh, we found the car. It's bad news, but yet the car with your boys is at the bottom of the lake. They were strapped in. And by the way, it was your wife who did it. How do you ever come back from that? You don't. Right? You don't. You rearrange your life and you pick the broken pieces up and try and meld them back together, but there's going to be shards missing and this chunk's gone and this is too shattered to put back together, and you do the best you can. So for them to have to gather 30 years, which hats off to them for doing it, 30 years later and listen to her pretty much cosplay the same BS that she did 30 years ago in the news. Right? I mean, again, I'm just like, after 30 years, this is where you're at. No words for it. No words. And I'm not trying to be holier than thou or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're all human. We all have our faults. We all have our whatever, right? I'm not perfect. Okay, I get that. But like, this right here is so tragic. And I just remember this happening. You know, I just remember it happening. And then like 30 years later and being like, my God, I look at the life that I've lived. You know, and again, when you sit here and think of all the ways that you can leave this earth, this experience, and to be like your last thoughts, and I don't even know how a child that young comprehends anything, especially the youngest one. He probably didn't, right? Until it was like that natural human fear of survival before you cough underwater and inhale water and that kind of thing. The little bit older one he probably knew. You know, it's like, wait, what's going on? Why is mom back there? Like, those were the realizations. You know what I'm saying? That's absolutely, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, you know, let alone 2 little innocent kids, okay? And then for her to saunter around wearing that man's sweatshirt, pretending to cry on TV. No. And again, the crying was the same in this. It was the same thing. And to listen to each family member get up there and talk about how shattered their lives were over this and just the daily actions that they do. She will never see the light of day. They can make a Netflix, a Prime thing on talking about this case. I do not ever see the public taking sympathy with Susan Smith, okay? I just don't, right? I mean, it could be wrong, but I just don't. On a political, this is South Carolina, okay? This is the South, right? You think just political stuff alone, right? You think anyone is going to put the green stamp with their name on it that they let Susan Smith out? No. Absolutely not. Look at the Manson girls. They saw people come and go from prison doing worse than they did. You think even now they were going to put a green stamp and say, yep, I let the Manson girls out? Absolutely not, right? There's political stuff to it. When these crimes that shock the world, okay? When you have shocked the world, no. But I mean, you know what? You never know. I mean, there's other things that come up. But I mean, this is just, it's so heinous. Anyways, I could go on and on about this. It bothers me so much. I actually forgot that I'm recording. And we're just sitting here talking at this point. This is the self-diagnosed personality disorder I'm talking about. I'm having a full-fledged conversation with the camera at this point. So let's round it out. My gosh. Okay. So anyways, that is it. If you want to watch the whole thing, it was fascinating to watch because we often don't see the parole hearings, right? So when I saw this was live, I was like, they're showing this. Now the whole live stream, they showed other people's parole stuff. It was very fascinating, the process of it and whatnot. So I implore you go. I watched it on Court TV, which just had like this segment, but like their other networks and stuff had it if you want to go see it. So it is interesting to watch, and definitely go. I might do a video that just talks about the families talking and whatnot, but I wanted to get my thoughts out here about like the Susan part of it right here. So that's it. If you're still watching, thank you for hanging out with me for this long. It is greatly appreciated. If you could drop some sofas off in the comment section for myself, Rosco and Spirit, Bo and Luke, who are sleeping quietly next to me, so that we'll all have a place to hang out in the comment section with our Sofa Squad family and talk about this case and all the other ones we do talk about here at the Sofa Squad. And until we meander our way down there, I'll see y'all soon. I just wanted to say thank you again for watching the whole video, and also thank you for being part of the Sofa Squad. Special thanks to all the Patreon members, channel members from both of my channels, everybody who likes, shares, subscribes, comments in the comment sections. It helps the channel out so much. Now, don't forget, I do have that other channel, the podcast channel. That's where we go live, we hang out, we talk. We have kind of sort of a schedule, but just be sure and check it out. I'll put it up here on the screen. Also, if you're looking for merch, be sure to check out my Teespring store. I'll put that up here. And then, like I said in the beginning of the video, if you want to follow me and Rosco on the Instagram, go on, check it out. It's right here on the screen again. But once again, thank you very much. I really appreciate you being part of the Sofa Squad, and I'll see you in the next video.